Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on what businesses can expect from the Biden administration. Thank you for joining us today. I am Eric Fogel, co-chair of Smith Amundsen's Corporate Practice Group. With me as presenters today are my colleagues John Tansel, co-chair of our Financial Services Group, and Senior Counsel Carrie Hill. John and Carrie are both members of our Business Transactions Group and are well-versed in helping companies navigate the practical impacts that regulatory and legal changes have on business operations. We have today 15 different topics to cover on a wide variety of issues relating to the Biden administration. The presentation will move quickly, but we hope you find it informative and engaging. In the interest of time, we kindly ask that you save any questions for the end of the webinar, and we will do our best to answer them if time allows. You may also enter your questions using the webinar chat feature, and we will address your questions at the end of our presentation. If we don't get to your question, please feel free to follow up with any one of us using the contact information which will be shown at the conclusion of the presentation. We are happy to have a discussion with you offline to answer any questions you may have. With that, let's begin by talking about our first topic, taxation under the Biden administration, which I will address. Okay, here are the highlights. President Biden has proposed a tax plan which increases the corporate income tax rate and implements an alternative minimum tax for corporations. The corporate rate would rise from 21% to 28%. That's across the board. There are no exemptions for small businesses. In addition, a 15% alternative minimum tax would apply to corporations with net income of 100 million or more. In addition, taxes on foreign profits of American corporations would double from 10.5% to 21%. President Biden has stated that no one making under $400,000 a year will have their taxes increased. So the focus under the Biden administration is on corporations and incentivizing U.S. corporations not to keep their profits overseas, and as we'll see, also on the highest income earners. President Biden proposes an increase in the top marginal rate from 37% to 39.6%. for those who earn more than $400,000. Now, the White House press secretary has clarified that the $400,000 applies to household income, not individual income. So it would be husband and wife or partner and partner collective income for that household. There is a potential for raising the estate tax to 45% and an elimination of the step-up in basis for inherited taxes. And there would be an additional Social Security tax on income over $400,000. So here's the focus. Taxpayers making $400,000 or more in income represent 1.8% of all taxpayers. They earn approximately 25% of the nation's income. The $400,000 per household cutoff is also higher than the $250,000 income threshold proposed by President Obama in 2008. Since President Biden's plan is largely a marginal tax increase, taxpayers will only see tax hikes on household income above $400,000. So those making slightly more than 400,000 will see a small increase, while the bulk of the $4 trillion that President Biden seeks to add to the government coffers would come from earners making more than 1 million and corporations. So people making between 400,000 and 700,000, or households, I should say, making that amount, are going to have a tax increase of only about 1% or less. The tax plan on individuals is really aimed at the very top, the top half of 1%, or the top 1/10 of 1%. Here are some other quick features just on a quick basis. The Biden plan would also impose a 12.4% additional payroll tax on income earned above 400,000, evenly split between employers and employees. Taxes of long-term gains and qualified dividends will occur at the ordinary income tax rate of 39.6% on income above $1 million. So you only go into this ordinary tax regime if you have income of more than $1 million. President Biden's plan caps the tax benefit of itemized deductions to 28% of value for those earning more than 400,000. For 2021, and as long as economic conditions require, President Biden's plan increases the child tax credit from a maximum of $2,000 to $3,000 for children 17 or younger, while providing a $600 bonus credit for children under 6. And President Biden reestablishes the first-time homeowners tax credit, which was originally created during the Great Recession to help the housing market. Biden's home buyers credit would provide up to $15,000 for first-time home buyers. In addition, President Biden's plan establishes a manufacturing communities tax credit to reduce the tax liability of businesses that experience workforce layoffs or a major government institution closure. In addition, the plan offers tax credits to small businesses for adopting workplace retirement savings plans, and the plan imposes a new 10% surtax on corporations that offshore manufacturing and service jobs to foreign nations in order to manufacture them less expensively and sell those goods back to the American market. So the surtax would raise the effective corporate tax rate on this offshoring activity to 30.8%. President Biden also establishes a 10% Made in America tax credit for activities that restore production in this country, revitalize existing closed or closing facilities in this country, or retool facilities to advance manufacturing employment or expand manufacturing payroll. And with that, let me just conclude by saying that as you can see, the Biden plan is really aimed at corporations, bringing back profits to the United States so they can be taxed here, incentivizing corporations not to offshore manufacturing anymore, encouraging Buy American. There are also tax credits for renewable energy, and the taxes aimed at the very wealthiest of our society. And with that, I am going to turn it over to John Tanzel for insurance.
Thank you, Eric. Obviously, there's a lot going on with the tax side. The health insurance is not as full of surprises as the tax side. Biden will obviously look to bring back Obamacare. Some are calling it Obamacare 2.0. And that will, as we have on the slide here, give a new public health insurance option similar to Medicare. That would be an option that would compete with the private insurance. It would lower the Medicare enrollment age from 65 to 60. Now, that would potentially have an impact on business owners because you may have earlier retirements. Studies have shown some people hang around till 65 until they can qualify for Medicare. So if they qualify at 60, we could see more people electing that option. We're also looking at the potential for federally mandated legislation where workers get up to 12 weeks of paid family and sick leave. If that does occur, we obviously need to sit down and take a look at your PTO policies to see what that would do to us. With respect to long-term care, with our longer lifespans, dementia issues, things like that. The Biden administration is very sympathetic to that. They're looking at enhancing tax credits for premiums to purchase that long-term care insurance and expand the current subsidies. And then lastly, they want to help the lower income people. They're looking at expanding subsidies more based on what percentage of family income will be paid out. Currently, I think the cap is somewhere around 9.5, 9.6%. They want to drop that down into the 8 range. But the good news is that everyone is predicting that health insurance costs for the companies are going to stabilize or perhaps even decrease as we go forward. So the health insurance is not a bad issue for ourselves coming forward on this. And I think we're now ready to roll into the Buy American Act.
Thanks, John. The Biden administration signed an executive order in January to strengthen the existing Buy American Act. President Biden has said that he's committed to investing significantly in American-made products, industries, and companies while working on a bipartisan basis, and he believes these investments will strengthen the small business supply chains and create well-paid union jobs to help build back the economy. Now, the Bureau of Labor estimates that approximately 7.5 million manufacturing jobs have been lost to foreign countries since 1980 due to lax Buy American policies, and contracting alone accounts for nearly $600 billion in federal spending. So the existing Buy American Act emphasizes support of manufacturers, businesses, and workers to ensure that more products and component parts are made in America, and it imposes a price preference for domestic end products and construction materials in federal procurements. Biden's executive order came just days after a final rule, which became effective on January 21st, to increase the domestic content requirements and pricing preferences under the existing act. So this final rule that went into effect on January 21st before the Biden executive order increased the component test threshold, which is the cost of its components mined, produced, or manufactured in the United States, from 50% to 55% for most end products and construction materials. It also set a separate component test threshold of 95% for products that are made wholly or predominantly of iron and steel, and it increased the pricing preferences for large businesses from 6% to 20% and small businesses from 12% to 30%. Now, this rule remains in effect for now, and it will be included in any solicitations that are issued on or after February 22nd, 2021. So Biden's executive order didn't invalidate this final rule that went into effect. Specifically, the Biden executive order proposes a shift to a more value-added approach with increased domestic content thresholds and price preferences. He proposes to replace the component test with a test under which domestic content is measured by the value that is added to the product through U.S.-based production or U.S.-based job-supporting economic activity. He is proposing to increase by an unspecified amount the numerical threshold for domestic content requirements for end products and construction materials, and also to increase by an unspecified amount the price preferences for domestic end products and domestic construction materials. So in other words, the difference in price over which the government can buy a product from a non-U.S. supplier if the price of a competing domestic product is deemed excessively high. Now, this executive order is silent on how these new thresholds will be measured or how it would be accomplished. And under the new value-added test, the domestic content may be measured by the extent to which the individual components are also physically produced or manufactured in the U.S. There's lots of unknowns here, and federal contractors are going to want to closely monitor and participate in the process because they do have a voice in the material changes that are going to happen. So with that, we're going to go back to Eric and talk about trade with China.
Thank you, Carrie. This is perhaps the one area, trade with China, where Biden has not wholesale replaced the Trump policy because he likes the cards that he's been dealt in terms of dealing with China on the global geopolitical level. The 2021 trade policy agenda indicates the Biden administration is undertaking a review of U.S. trade policy with China, but is committed to using all available tools to take on a range of China's unfair trade practices that continue to harm U.S. workers and businesses. That's a quote, unquote. Recently, the Biden administration has defended President Trump's 2018 expansion of tariffs on Chinese goods against lawsuits brought by thousands of U.S. companies, which claim Trump overstepped his authority and scope. So importers from China, including Walmart, Disney, Lululemon, and Walgreens, claim that Trump illegally increased the number of Chinese goods subject to duties under Section 301 of the U.S. Trade Act of 1974. So these are companies that are heavily dependent on goods and supplies from China. And when Walt Disney or Lululemon or Walgreens bring them into the country, they have to pay duties on them. So that is what the corporations are complaining about. The Biden administration, in its first substantive answer to these companies, said the president's trade policy through the U.S. Trade Representative is due substantial deference. Section 301 of the Act allows the executive branch to respond to unreasonable or discriminatory acts, policies, or practices of foreign governments that restrict U.S. commerce. So, just to give you an idea of the lawsuits affecting the tariffs against China, normally in the U.S. Court of International Trade, there might be 300 new cases a year. But since Trump imposed tariffs, there have been more than 3,700 challenges that have been filed, showing the tremendous economic impact of these tariffs. So it all started in 2018 when Trump imposed tariffs on Chinese goods worth a combined $50 billion in 2018 trade values. China, quite predictably, retaliated and imposed its own tariffs on goods coming in from America. And then Trump doubled down and expanded the tariffs to an additional estimated 320 billion of Chinese goods. Although much of the cost of the Section 301 tariffs are borne by Americans, they hurt China's economy too. Congress passed Section 301 to give the president broad discretion to respond to unfair foreign practices. So these lawsuits could take months or years to resolve. There's likely going to be appeals, maybe even to the US Supreme Court. And on a most recent development, on March 5th, 2021, the US Trade Representative announced that it is extending tariff exclusions on PPE equipment from China, extended through September 30th, 2021. So PPE equipment can come in to fight COVID without tariffs. And then in late February, Biden signed an executive order to review supply chains for pharmaceutical, critical materials, semiconductors, and high-capacity batteries, indicating that there might be some relief in tariffs for those industries. And with that, I turn it back over to John Tanzel to discuss banking. John?
Thank you, Eric. From the banking standpoint, if I were a banker sitting out there, I don't think you can expect to see a lot of expansion of powers right now coming from the Biden administration or the regulators. What I think we're going to see is a lot more scrutiny as it relates to fair lending, making sure that artificial, and there's been a big push about whether the algorithms in the artificial intelligence are inherently biased. So you're going to have to make sure that when we do underwriting, that the loan writes up good credit analysis. There is, I think there's been a resolution introduced by a Democrat in Congress to roll back the true lender doctrine. So a lot of this is going to kind of go hand in hand, I think, with the social justice aspects. We'll get to those later in this presentation. But I think the banks are going to have to be very aware of these things. You're going to see much more, I think, scrutiny on the consumer side, on the compliance side. The Biden administration is generally in favor of fintechs, but I'm unclear. I don't think the industry is clear on how that's going to shake out at this point. Obviously, there's lawsuits challenging the OCC's granting of the special purpose charter. The OCC modernized its Community Reinvestment Act regulations in 2020. Those are a chance that those are going to get rolled back. You know, the FDIC did not join in that. So from a banking perspective, don't look for new powers. Look for more enforcement, and I think especially on the lending side, the Biden administration is making sure that the underprivileged, the low to mod income areas are adequately served, and they'll be looking, I think, to use CRA pretty significantly to get the funds where they belong. The PPP, as you know, has been extended to May 31 to get the applications in, but there's a real focus, you know, on making sure those goes to mod low income and minority-owned businesses. I think that shows kind of where the presentation is at from the Biden administration. So there's, you know, it's a tough environment. The last bit is, and I'm sure you've all heard, the Federal Reserve says we could start seeing interest rates creep back up in 22, but you know, nobody's got the crystal ball on that, so we're probably going to continuing to deal with the net interest income margin compression. So with that, Carrie, we'll go back to renewable energy.
So there's a lot of talk about the Biden administration's commitment to the environment. This, along with social justice, which we're going to discuss shortly, are among the top priorities for the president. He's proposed an ambitious agenda to transform energy policy in the U.S. and has made it an administration-wide priority. His primary environmental focus is on climate change and energy, and he is largely in favor, which is no surprise to anybody, of renewable energy and clean energy technology. It's expected that the Biden administration will propose a renewal, extension, or expansion of existing or expiring tax incentives related to clean energy. So existing credits for wind, solar, and certain other renewable energy sources are expected to be extended, as he considers them crucial for the development of the renewable energy industry and the continued potential for growth. Already, a solar industry trade group has asked the administration to remove tariffs on imported solar panels that were imposed by the previous administration. Now, we can't talk about energy policy without talking about carbon. Biden has temporarily raised the social cost of carbon at $51 per ton, and this number is considered to be one of the most important numbers in relation to climate change. This is well above the cost that was used under the former administration, who declined to factor the global impacts of climate pollution into the calculation. And the social cost of carbon went as low as $1 per ton under the prior administration. Now, this price point is temporary while an interagency group is continuing to research the issue, and a final number is expected to be issued next January. So what does that mean for my business? The social cost of carbon will factor into a wide variety of policy decisions, including EPA regulations and government spending. Biden does not support a carbon tax because he views it as unfair to the economically disadvantaged and racial minorities. Instead, Biden's regulatory and infrastructure package is aimed at driving new greenhouse gas emissions to zero in electricity by 2035 and the entire economy by 2050, which is a pretty lofty goal. Now, Biden has already taken immediate action to promote his climate agenda through several executive orders. First of all, he rejoined the Paris Climate Accord, which sets forth a global framework to prevent dangerous climate change. He has signed an executive order on protecting public health and the environment and restoring science to tackle the climate crisis. And in doing so, he has required all agencies to do a reassessment of Trump administration regulations and policies and conduct an immediate review to see if any of these policies are inconsistent or an obstacle to his stated goals. Agencies are to consider rules that are going to suspend, revise, or rescind agency actions in 4 key areas targeting climate change, which are revisions to the methane reduction regulations for the oil and gas industry, the rules revising and reducing certain fuel economy standards for vehicles, energy efficiency standards for consumer products and appliances, and hazardous emission regulations for coal and oil-fired utilities. And in that EO, he's also revoked the March 2019 permit for the Keystone XL pipeline. One other really interesting item in the executive order is that he will require the replacement of the entire fleet of federal vehicles with U.S.-built electric cars, vans, and trucks, which encompasses in all about 645,000 vehicles nationwide, and will provide over 500,000 electric vehicle chargers. And he's stating that this is going to help strengthen the national automotive industry while still prioritizing climate change. And the cost savings to the U.S., estimated by Northwestern University, is expected to be in the $70 billion range. So this is really exciting news to any businesses that are in the electric vehicle arena. So with that being said, I'm going to send it back to Eric to talk about immigration.
Carrie and Eric, before you do that, this is John. I just want to kind of, as an exclamation point, the Biden administration, there's a solar tax credit under Section 48 of the Internal Revenue Code, and the comptroller has come out with a new reg, which is really encouraging banks to take advantage of this, which I think goes to just kind of show where the government's coming from on the environment and clean energy thing. Sorry for interrupting, but I wanted to make sure everybody knew where they were. Eric.
That's great. Thanks.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, John. Okay, on to immigration. So obviously a lot in the news about immigration. I'm not going to touch the political issues, but I am going to talk about the impact of the Biden administration's policies on employment visas, which I think will be of interest to a lot in the audience. Biden is obviously seeking an immigration reset. One of his priorities is an overhaul of the visa program. And the overhaul and the expansion of the visa program will be effected as follows. First, there will probably be more employment-based green cards. So in 2019, the US government awarded more than 139,000 employment-based green cards to foreign workers and their families. Biden's proposals would seek to boost that number considerably and would eliminate the per country cap that prevents immigrants and people from any single country to account for more than 7% of green cards. And President Biden is also looking to streamline the procedure and get these green cards to people faster. Diversity visas. Each year, about 50,000 people receive green cards through the U.S. Diversity Visa Program, also known as the Visa Lottery. Since the program began in 1995, more than 1 million immigrants have received green cards through the lottery, which seeks to diversify the U.S. immigrant population by granting visas to underrepresented nations. The Biden administration has proposed legislation to increase the annual total to 80,000 diversity visas. President Trump has sought to eliminate the program entirely. And there's also going to be changes to the H-1B visas. Most people in the audience are probably familiar with this program, but the H-1B program is a visa that allows U.S. employers to temporarily employ foreign workers that are skilled in specialty occupations. A specialty occupation requires specialized knowledge and a bachelor's degree or the equivalent of work experience. The duration of the stay is 3 years, extendable to 6 years, after which time the visa holder may apply for reapplication. Laws limit the number of H-1B visas that are issued each year to 65,000 visas. An additional 6,800 visas are permitted under the Singapore-Chile Free Trade Agreement. The 65,000 H-1B visa cap has been reached every year from 2004 to 2020. Ultimately, Biden is seeking to undo many of Trump's restrictive H-1B policies, which will make it easier for U.S. businesses to employ skilled foreign workers for specialty occupations. In fiscal 2019, more than 188,000 high-skilled foreign workers received H-1B visas. And H-1B visas account for 22% of all temporary visas for employment issued in 2019. And with that, I am going to continue on with corporate governance, which will be addressed by myself and John Tanzel. Okay. In March 2021, the SEC announced the creation of a climate and ESG task force. ESG, I'm sure many of you know what it means, but it stands for environmental, social, and governance. There are potential proposals relating to diversity, gender equality, and worker representation in board of director composition. Biden is supportive of corporate social responsibility concepts and other manifestations of what it means to be a values-driven company. Biden has indicated endorsement of a model of stakeholder capitalism, espoused perhaps most vociferously by Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, as opposed to shareholder capitalism. So the difference is quite stark. So with shareholder capitalism, boards of directors owe their fiduciary duties to maximizing shareholder value for shareholders. That's their duty. When shareholders sue a board of directors, it's usually because the directors breach their fiduciary duty to maximize shareholder value. Stakeholder capitalism, almost completely different. Stakeholder capitalism means that you have to take into account other constituents in addition to shareholders, like workers, the community, and even the competition. This is a model that's employed by many European countries, stakeholder capitalism. But it seems like the Biden administration is going to be advocating more and more for stakeholder capitalism as opposed to shareholder capitalism. So
and Eric, if I could interject just real quickly, it's unclear what that's going to mean for someone who is sitting as a director, because he or she has always looked to the state law on what's my duty, what's my responsibility, and as Eric said, it goes to your shareholders. If that shifts, that could necessitate some types of revision to state laws on what is the duty of a director. So, sorry, Eric, go ahead, please.
That's a very good point. Thank you, John. But let me share a quote from President Biden on this very topic. Quote, "It's way past time we put an end to the era of shareholder capitalism. The idea that the only responsibility a corporation has is with shareholders, that's simply not true. It's an absolute farce. They have a responsibility to their workers, their community, to their country. That isn't a radical notion." End quote. So that's why we believe Biden will work towards stakeholder capitalism. And with respect to diversity, President Biden and his administration obviously very committed to diversity in the boardroom. So Vice President Harris, for instance, has said, quote, "When our country's corporate leadership looks more like the rest of the country, it ensures a wider array of perspectives are heard in meetings and boardrooms, and that the needs and interests of more people are considered. We must do more to hold companies accountable for living up to their own diversity goals and make sure that we have reliable data about their progress." End quote. In December 2020, NASDAQ filed a rule proposal with the SEC that would require most companies to disclose the breakdown of their board of directors based on race, gender, and sexual orientation. The proposed rule would require that companies have at least 2 diverse directors that are either female, an underrepresented minority, or a member of the LGBTQ community. If a company cannot meet such a requirement, it would have to explain why. This will obviously affect public companies, but it will trickle to private companies, particularly companies that want to do business with the federal government. John, with respect to corporate governance, do you have anything else to add?
Just very quickly, and this is very much consistent with what you were just speaking of, Eric, but the proxy advisors out there, Glass Lewis and ISS, are both pushing for what they call board refreshment. And in essence, that means that you don't want to have someone on the board who's been there for 20 years. They are afraid that that would start to impinge upon his or her independence as a director as it relates to management. So I think that potentially could be used as a way to bring in more new ideas on the board and make a board more inclusive through kind of the concept of the refreshment of the board. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to Carrie. She's going to combine two topics, which is social justice and diversity. Take it away, Carrie.
Thanks, Eric. President Biden has already taken action and signed an array of executive orders which really show his commitment to social justice and diversity initiatives and telling everyone that these are a major priority during his first term. His actions during the first week in office to advance equity have been called one of the most robust efforts to advance racial justice in the first few weeks of any new administration. He's filled key economic and cabinet positions with leaders in the racial equity and social justice space, and he's carefully selected them to ensure that they reflect the values and priorities of his administration, but also the diversity of perspectives that's crucial for addressing America's most urgent and complex problems. He has created, through the State Department, a Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer position, which will establish diversity and inclusion policies across the department, establish practices for transparency on initiatives to increase diversity, and hold senior leadership accountable. This Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer will report directly to the Secretary of State, and each bureau of the State Department will designate an existing Deputy Assistant Secretary to support diversity and inclusion efforts and serve on a D&I Leadership Council to achieve benchmarks on a soon-to-be-released Diversity and Inclusion Strategic Plan. Now, just today, Biden announced in the American Jobs Plan he said that the American Jobs Plan, I want to get this right, is an investment in America that will create millions of good jobs, rebuild our country's infrastructure, and position the United States to outcompete China. So he is calling on Congress to invest $20 billion in regional innovation hubs and a community revitalization fund, which will spark new economic activity, provide services and amenities, build community wealth, and close the current gaps in access to the innovation economy for communities of color and rural communities that have suffered from years of disinvestment. And he's also calling on Congress to quadruple the support for the Manufacturing Extensions Partnership, which increases the involvement of minority-owned and rurally located small and medium-sized enterprises in technological advancement. So there's going to be a lot of exciting opportunities coming for small and medium-sized companies in this area. And with that, there's a lot more to talk about, but in the interest of time, we're going to move back to Eric to talk about crypto.
Thank you, Carrie. So cryptocurrency and Bitcoin is here and coming your way soon. So last year, there was more than $100 billion in transactions in cryptocurrency just in the US, more than $1 trillion around the world. You probably heard that Tesla recently bought 1.5 billion worth of crypto, Bitcoin that is. About 30 public companies hold deposits of Bitcoin. Insurance companies hold deposits of Bitcoin. Wyoming, the state of Wyoming, permits its state banks to hold deposits of crypto. Accounting firm Grant Thornton accepts payments in crypto. And Goldman Sachs believes that Bitcoin is going to $60,000 per coin. Your customers soon will want to pay you in cryptocurrency. Jerome Powell, chair of the Federal Reserve, states that Bitcoin is not a replacement currency to the money that we currently have. We know that the SEC has become increasingly aggressive on going after derivative cryptocurrencies, derivative digital assets that look more like securities. And so has the Commodities Future Commission has gone after people who trade in cryptocurrency as well on those grounds. So with respect to Biden's position on crypto, I think the jury is still out. It's still early days, but the cryptocurrency world and Bitcoin is moving fast, and it's being adopted in all segments across the country. So in the interest of time, I'm going to end there and take, and now it goes to John Tanzel on privacy.
Thanks, Eric. The Biden administration is made privacy kind of a focal point of their efforts. His team includes people who played a central role in developing privacy policies during Obama's presidency. On an overreaching thing, President Biden has reestablished a cybersecurity coordinator in the White House, which was there during the Obama administration, was eliminated during the Trump administration. So cybersecurity, there's been a lot of hacks, obviously, so that's being elevated within the administration. Vice President Harris had a very active role in privacy when she was the Attorney General in California. Actually had a joint statement of principles with big tech when she was out there, and that was like with Amazon, Apple, Google, which would talk about how they would treat consumer privacy. The piece of federal legislation which is being kicked around coming from the Democrats right now is called COPRA, or the Consumer Online Privacy Rights Act. It was introduced last year, and what it does is provide certain privacy rights for individuals. There are exceptions for businesses and entities. They're subject to other federal privacy acts such as HIPAA, Grand Leach, and things like that. For me, representing businesses, the scary part is that there is a private right of action currently contained in this. So if that stays in there, it will be something that we're going to have to watch out for. It will be enforced by the FTC. People seem to think that that has a pretty good chance of being passed. So going forward for these new privacy laws, one of the things that Vice President Harris did as Attorney General, and one enforcement action was require a startup tech to include a chief privacy officer. I don't know that will ever get legs to be a mandatory practice, but it could be something which could look like a best practice for companies. The other issue which is being looked at by the Biden administration is net neutrality. That's because there's a belief that if you don't have to pay for the fast lane, in essence, everybody's treated the same, which should help the smaller businesses, and I think that's very consistent with their efforts to help low to mod income individuals. The Biden administration is also wanting to revoke Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Was in the news a lot during the Trump administration. Section 230 gives websites protects websites from legal liability for comments of their users. President Biden says people should be held responsible if their website continues to expand falsehoods if they know them to be false. The last piece that is going to be an interesting development will be the European Union U.S. Privacy Shield that was invalidated by the European Union Court of Justice in July of last year, which now that was a framework designed to facilitate the transfer of information across the Atlantic. The problem has been the U.S. privacy regulations conflict with the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation. So they're trying to work through. Biden has indicated he thinks that's important, that we try to find a framework to safely transfer that data back and forth. There is talk about breaking up big tech. That won't happen, but I think you are going to see more regulations imposed on big tech due to the privacy issues. With that, I think, Eric, we're going to come back to you to talk about for-profit colleges.
Okay, thank you, John. Try to make this quick. Under the Obama administration, many for-profit colleges were considered predatory. That is, at least under the Obama administration's interpretation, they were offering students an education that led to few good jobs. And in the process, students incurred a lot of student debt. Those debts were guaranteed or paid for by the federal government, and the default rate on the loan repayment back to the federal government was high. So President Obama and his administration was very aggressive in terms of their regulation of for-profit colleges. The Trump administration and Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos rolled back these Obama policies and encouraged students, especially non-traditional learners, to attend for-profit colleges. The Biden administration is expected to renew regulation of for-profit colleges. Biden is expected to mirror many of the regulations that Obama put into place before Trump reversed them. Biden will seek to cut back on predatory practices, especially with respect to for-profit colleges and eligibility for student loans. The Biden administration recently announced that there will be $1 billion in loan forgiveness for approximately 72,000 Americans that attended for-profit colleges. This reverses a Trump administration policy that gave these borrowers only partial relief. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Senator Elizabeth Warren have called on Biden to more broadly forgive $50,000 in federal student loan debt per borrower across all students, not just for-profit. However, Biden said he would support canceling only $10,000 per borrower and has repeatedly resisted pressure, arguing that the federal government shouldn't forgive debt for people who went to Harvard, Yale, and Penn. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to John to discuss regulatory agencies. I think that's going to be our final topic. And then if there's any time, we'll take questions.
Okay, thanks, Eric. The regulatory agencies, we'll start with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The Biden administration is going to put the teeth back into the agency. Under the Trump administration, there was an idea that the CFPB would regulate by regulation and put it out for comments. When it was first formed under the Obama administration, it would regulate more by enforcement. And the comments made by the proposed head of CFPB indicates they're going to go back to the regulation by enforcement. The proposed head, Chopra, has said he would look hard at the nature of innovation in the industry and how data is used. He would want to make sure that homeowners are continuing to be protected. As we discussed with banking, they're going to also look at making sure that payday loans are going to be held to a higher standard than was done under the Trump administration. They're going to make sure that there is racial equity in consumer finance. COVID-19 relief, student loan relief that Eric talked about, those are very high on the priority list based on comments that have been made to Congress. The Labor Department is reviewing one of the rules from the Trump administration, which would make it easier to classify employees as independent contractors. This is the whole Uber situation, and so we're not sure where that will end up, but that's something to keep an eye on, especially for those of us out there that use a lot of independent contractors. And then lastly, with the PPP, as we talked earlier, there has been a move by the Biden administration to try to get those funds into minority-owned businesses, into low to moderate income areas, again, trying to jumpstart the economy and address issues raised by all the social discussion conversations which have taken place in this country. So Eric, I'm going to wrap up with that. If we have time for questions, I think there's just a few minutes left. I want to be mindful of our of all of our people's times on this.
Sure,
so thank you.
Sure. Well, thank you, John, and thank you, Carrie. Obviously, I think everybody can see that the Biden administration has made very broad changes already, very fast. So let's see if there are any questions from the audience. Maybe if you could send a question into the chat room or unmute yourself. Okay. I'm sure somebody out there must have a question, unless our presentation was just so clear. I guess we must have answered all the, the outstanding.
We cover a lot of territory, and as a business owner, you know, there are a lot of balls to keep your eye on. They're still developing. We don't have anything specific that we can talk about yet, but I think if we do this in a year, there'll be a lot of changes out there, especially with taxes and as the privacy issues continue to surge along with environmental and social justice matters. So I really appreciate everyone coming to this today, and we are available. If you have questions afterwards, please shoot us emails, and we can always get back to you just right away. Eric, Carrie, any closing comments?
No, I think that's terrific. So thank you, everybody, for attending, and we really appreciate you listening in from your busy schedules.
Thank you.